Yo, what's going on, everybody? It is Chad M here with BetHub.com. Today there's been some absolutely massive and shocking news in the National Hockey League, which has seen the Toronto Maple Leafs fire general manager Brian Burke. And so many people were taken by this because he is one of the most boisterous, loud, and prevalent personalities surrounding the sport of hockey. And anytime someone like this loses their job, you know it's going to grab attention and headlines. And of course that's the case in the Mecca, the center of all attention when it comes to hockey, which is Toronto. And I have so many things to start breaking down here with this matter. And the first thing that I want to get off my chest is what I believe to be the predominant reason for his departure. And yes, I know it's so easy to point to the record, the 129, 135, and 42, under 500 in a league where 80% of the teams finish over 500 every year with the shootout losses and the show-up points and all that, and not having made the playoffs in the 4 years that he has been there. But I think it's a far more deep-rooted issue than that, and it has a lot to do with what's occurred in the summer when Rogers decided to take over the majority ownership of MLSE, the team that owns the Toronto Maple Leafs. And since then, they've done an evaluation on the management, and they are not satisfied with the personality of Brian Burke, the fact that he's extremely brash and outspoken, has no problem picking fights with members of the media, and getting involved in a lot of controversies. And from a corporate image standpoint, I don't believe that this is the type of person they wanted representing their company. Just think about it. Here you have a massive media conglomerate in Rogers who wants to put their ads, say, in the Toronto Sun or on Hockey Night in Canada or TSN. But yet, at the same point in time, the people that are going to be breaking down hockey in the newspaper print or the talking heads on TV are probably going to spend a great deal of time breaking down what Brian Burke has done wrong, accumulating to this poor record over those 4 years. And they can't seem to handle that. They want their advertising and their products to be promoted with positive things being said about the now team that they own, which wasn't the case before. And I know nobody's going to come out on record and say that, of course not, but I'm reading a little bit here between the lines, especially when I see a comment from Tom Ansari, the representative of Major League Sports Entertainment, saying they wanted a change of voice and direction. Well, what does change of voice and direction mean? Because if it truly was about results, it would have said Brian Burke was brought in to do a job and turn this organization around, and he has not been able to do that. That wasn't mentioned at all. They want to go a new direction, which means they don't like Brian Burke as a personality for what he has done. Because if it was a real change of direction from a hockey perspective, trust me, Dave Nonis would not be having this position right now, because he is pretty much just a little pawn. He's the right-hand man of Burke. He's being trained by Burke. It was the same thing when he took over in Vancouver, and it will be the same thing in Toronto. He's a yes man, somebody that isn't quite as aggressive as Burke, and will probably do more of what MLSE wants him to do because of the fact that he doesn't have the same level of success as Brian Burke as being a general manager, just a short tenure in Vancouver, so they can control him a lot more. And then the second biggest issue here, which I believe did have a factor in this, and there's no way we'll ever really be able to find out unless there's some crazy inside source that leaks things, I think Roberto Luongo did have something to do with this, and it could have gone both ways. Either Burke really wanted to obtain him, and MLSE said no, absolutely not, or vice versa. MLSE said we're getting close here. We need to make the playoffs this year. Luongo can put us over the top. You do whatever it takes to get him here. And Burke said, I'm not risking more players of the future. I'm not taking on the salary cap, and I don't want to deal with it. And furthermore, I don't want to have to admit that my goaltending plans have absolutely failed here with James Reimer and the monster Gustafsson the last number of years. And therefore, it was easy to get rid of him and bring in Dave Nonis, someone who's had experience dealing with Luongo in trades, when he brought him to Vancouver. So that's why I really do believe Brian Burke got fired, because at the end of the day, when he took over the Leafs, they were an absolute mess. And I'm not saying that he's made them all that much better now, but for the most part, they did not give him a fair shakedown for an opportunity to really rebuild this team, because we all know that the general rule of thumb when it comes to taking over franchises and sort of restarting them from scratch is generally a 5-year plan. He was not given the full 5 years, and it was completely unfair. And furthermore, if they really wanted to change the direction of the team from a hockey operations standpoint, you would have thought this would have been done in the off season, because that is generally a time where general managers do a lot of changes from a player perspective, whether it's at the draft, free agency, and trades, not during the middle of the year, especially when you come out of the lengthy lockout that just happened, and Brian Burke was extremely involved with that from a CBA perspective. As much as I don't like what he's done from a hockey standpoint in terms of running teams and producing on the ice, I think he is a very brilliant mind when it comes to business, and I can assure you that he was involved with that in a very positive limelight. So it's almost like they slapped him in the face, and as much as I don't like Burke's personality and the way he deals with the media, I don't think that he got the right end of the stick in this situation here. We all know that hockey and sports in general, the business of it, is not based on fairness. Burke will be the first to admit that himself. That being said, we cannot dismiss the fact that MLSE has acted like complete pigs here and have no idea what they're doing, and it's just an absolute train wreck and a circus. You don't fire someone when you're opening up the doors to hockey operations that have been closed for 7 months in this fashion here. It's an absolute embarrassment. The least they could have done is give him till the end of this year and deal with it in the off season. That's my rant with that. Now, the second part here is what Burke's actually done in Toronto, which isn't a whole lot of anything. And I personally believe that his mindset and his strategy going into Toronto was dead wrong from the get-go. He can claim all day long that he was trying to rebuild, but that was extremely evident that it was not the case when his first major move was deciding to trade their first overall pick for Phil Kessel from the Boston Bruins. Now, of course, at that time, he figured it would help put the team over the top and get them into the playoffs, and if that was the case, they'd never be giving up a lottery pick. Well, we all know that the prospects and the rest of the players in the organization did not live up to that. Therefore, they stunk the joint out and ended up being Tyler Seguin, an absolute stud, and then they also got Dougie Hamilton a few years ago, who's supposed to be another great young defenseman. So that trade is not looking very good, and he swung for the fences for immediate success then. Now, for all we know, Phil Kessel could still end up having a better overall career than Tyler Seguin. Personally, I don't think that's going to be the case, but I'm talking about more the mindset, the philosophy of not wanting to rebuild and having the opportunity to get high draft picks and just departing from that right off the get-go when he's talked about wanting to build from the proper way of drafting instead of doing trades and free agent signings. And truth be told, when you look at Burke with this tenure with Toronto and Anaheim and even Vancouver, he's never really done a great job of drafting. There's not a lot of players that he's put on rosters that were his own from the draft. He's done a half-decent job with some trades and some free agent signings, but not with the draft, and that's the core element and thing that you need to be very good at in order to build your team, and they've stunk the joint out like the Leafs have for so many years. And, you look at some of the other big moves that he's made, the Phaneuf trade, getting rid of Stage and Hagman and White, no big deal there because he never really gave up any integral parts. But did you really want to make Dion Phaneuf the franchise face, the captain, pay him $7+ million a year, build him up to be this Norris Trophy candidate? I just don't see it from him. So right then and there, it's almost like you've invested your future in him, and it clearly hasn't worked out, as Phaneuf's been good, but far from great. And then there's just so many other moves that he's made throughout his tenure in Toronto that I just don't understand. Even on a smaller scale, they went to go get Chris Versteeg because he thought that they were close to contending and making the playoffs. Well, what does he do? He trades him in the same year to Philadelphia, conceding that it's over with. Well, how can he come out there and say that the team's close and then all of a sudden, 6-7 months later, give up on it? He's had way too many transactions with the team that's contradicted what he said one day and then the results on the ice the other day. It's almost like he's overestimated the ability of his own team, and then he's realized later on, oh shit, this isn't working. I've got to get rid of some of these players. And, you look at some of the other high draft picks that he's had. What's Luke Shen done? I mean, he's a young defenseman. It's really hard to say at this point. He ended up trading him for James Van Riemsdyk this offseason. You can't really judge that yet since they haven't played hockey since that trade. Nazem Kadri, everyone bonkers over this guy. I haven't seen anything. Let's see this guy make the NHL. He went wild thinking that James Reimer was going to be the future goalie of this organization. He's crumbled down the stretch last year. He signed the monster Gustafsson. He's had massive goaltending problems from the get-go there, and that's been a big issue with the Toronto Maple Leafs. The defense was supposed to be great when he signed Mike Komisarek, the physical stay-at-home guy, for over $5 million a year. A complete busted. He's been a healthy scratch most of the time. Francois Beauchemin gave him some money because he was his boy back in Anaheim, blew up in his face. I mean, it's just been one free agent signing after another. The few young, talented players that they've had on the team are not exactly first liners, but he's paying them like they are, like Nikolai Kulemin and Michael Grabowski. They thought that Tyler Bozak was going to be a stud. He hasn't worked out. I mean, these are just some of the moves that I've written down here that I don't see panning out under Burke's tenure. And then when you look at the fact that he's come in here with this formula that he's always tried to adapt by, I want to have my top 6 being skilled forwards and my bottom 6 being fighters and enforcers and truculence and intensity and pound guys into the ground. It doesn't work like that, Burke. I know that this is a very calculated man. He's a very intelligent man with his law degrees and his commerce degrees. But building an NHL team is not a formula. It's more of an art. You need to understand that every single team has different players and personalities and chemistry issues. And you can't come in with such a firm, regimented formula as to what each line has. You need to be able to adapt on the fly. And I believe that's handicapped himself and held himself back by wanting to follow this formula. I mean, going out there and giving guys like Mike Brown 5-year contracts and Jay Rosehill and all these enforcers for what? They play 3 minutes of ice time a game. The only time they're effective is when your team's getting pounded 6-0 and you need some energy to make the team better. The whole concept makes no sense. So you want to pay someone to come on the ice and only be effective when your team's losing and it doesn't matter anyways. Oh, but what about the playoffs? Oh yeah, that's right. Enforcers don't play anyways. So if you intend to get to the playoffs, they're just going to be healthy scratches anyways. So what is the point? There is zero logic whatsoever. I've never been a big fan of the way he's been a big mouth to the media. I alluded to that earlier. He talks down to them. He doesn't show them respect. He always mouths off to them. He tries to flex his muscles because he's big Brian Burke and I'm the GM and you guys are the measly little media and I'll say what I want to you and how dare you question me, and anybody that does, I'm going to, be more aggressive back to you instead of showing any level of humbleness. And it's just unbelievable how rattled he gets by the media. You'd think someone with his pompous, arrogant, I'm the best Brian Burke type of mentality would be able to brush them off and not be bothered whatsoever. Just move on from that big deal. So they're media members. You answer a couple questions and you move on, laugh about it, joke about it, instead of getting into all these wars. And at the end of the day, that's probably what cost him, as I said earlier. And I just think that he's been a very overrated general manager in his career. Going back to his days in Vancouver, yes, I'll give him credit for taking a team that never made the playoffs into the playoffs, but they never made it over the hump. You can say that Gillis inherited a lot of his players. It was part of the success here for us getting to the Cup, but that was only once in Vancouver. We've never made it out of the second round any other time. And outside of the Anaheim Stanley Cup run, Burke has never produced a playoff team that has made it past the first round. He hasn't even made the playoffs with the Leafs and never did so with Vancouver. In Anaheim, he got extremely lucky. He inherited the young core players on that team like Getzlaf, like Perry, like Giguère and net at that time. I'm not going to say that he didn't make a good trade to bring in, guys like Marchand and get rid of Sikora's contract and Fedorov back then and Moen and all those grinders on the bottom 6 of that team. He brought Solani back when everybody thought he was done. He went out there and traded for Chris Pronger, which, wasn't the hardest thing to do given the fact that he banged an Edmonton reporter and the wife didn't want to be there, put him in a nice sunny California city to keep his wife quiet. He got Scott Niedermayer. You give him credit, but at the same point in time, you could have been the GM because he wanted to play with his brother at the end of his career. Yes, he made some nice moves there, but he didn't build that team from scratch from a young core standpoint. And that's what I'm alluding to with Burke. He'd be a good GM to take over a team that's sort of on the cusp of getting there, needs to add a few pieces, but when it comes to building from scratch, he is not the right general manager for it, and the Leafs made a big mistake when they brought him in the get-go. And, they didn't give him his full tenure because I do believe he at least deserved his full 5 years. But the bottom line is here, his mouth plus his lack of success made it a fairly easy decision with the new Rodgers taking over here and wanting to move in a new direction. And last but not least, the part that I cannot stand the most about Burke is the fact that he completely contradicts himself, and I just don't like the way he always wants to pick out wars with everybody. He wants to call out other GMs in the NHL for circumventing the cap and abusing the system. In particular, we know what happened when Dustin Penner got signed to that RFA deal by Tambellini when he was in Edmonton. He wanted to go crazy and fight him and all this kind of stuff. Or Kevin Lowe was at the time, not Tambellini. But he's just as guilty. How did he leave Anaheim? He said, he had no idea. He was never talking to Toronto. And all of a sudden, when the Samuelis got charged with insider trading and were going to be heaved in jail, that's when he went and negotiated behind their backs. He lied because he went against what the standards of ethics are in the NHL right then and there. And what about him and Ron Wilson when they tried to sign the Sedins in June before free agency started a few years ago? about. He has violated just as many of his so-called ethics and morals of the league, but yet anytime somebody else does something, he calls them out, and heaven forbid you do the same thing to him. He'll bark at you. He'll try to get you fired from your media outlet when you're only making 70, 80 grand a year trying to pay your mortgage and feed your family, when this guy's making a couple $1 million a year building a shitty hockey team. It's a disgusting way to act, and that's why I can't stand that mouthpiece. And then he comes out and lies last year saying Ron Wilson's his boy, he's a Hall of Fame coach. His job is never in jeopardy. He thinks the most of him. He's his boy from back in the day in Providence, Rhode Island. Boom, he's fired a few months later. Liar! All this guy does is lie and put on an act, and there's not enough people in the media that call him out, and if they do, they get their ass torn out, so they're afraid to because they don't want to have their job jeopardized. But you know what? I don't work for any major media outlet, so I'll call you out, Brian Burke, because I can't stand it, and at the end of the day, I'm satisfied you got fired.